Yeah.
Otherwise you get decisions like we're seeing out of this White House. These guys don't ask questions of anybody. They certainly, I saw this in the Pentagon. I would sit there in a briefing room with the Chief of Naval Operations, and I'd say to myself, somebody would tell him something, and I'd say to myself, if he reads the newspaper, he's got to know this is wrong. I witnessed this, firsthand. And, it scared the hell out of me because this guy sits at the top of, arguably the most powerful military organization in the world. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And anyway,
Yeah.
what can you do?
Yeah. Ted, let's get started with
Okay.
what has happened in Switzerland. Because before going to these technical parts of a nuclear war and how dangerous we are getting in this conflict in Ukraine, we have to consider what's at our disposal right now, what we're witnessing right now with the conflict. We had a summit in Switzerland discussing peace plan of Ukrainians. Before that, we had Putin talking about his preconditions for any sort of peace talks. How do you see the preconditions on the part of Putin, and after that we had this summit in Switzerland?
Well, I I Putin is furious with the West. He's made that clear. He's made multiple very clear statements about why he's been concerned. He gave this extraordinary speech to the leadership of the foreign ministry, which it looks, in my view, which is, again, I'm a non-expert on this, but I do know something. It seems to me that his speech to the foreign ministry is probably is as important as the speech he made in Munich in 2007. It's an extremely important speech laying out why he has the concerns he has. And it's clear that he believes that the West has been lying to him, to be rather than saying insincere. I think he believes they've been actively lying to him and that he cannot trust a word that they say. And if that is true, and I believe it is true, I don't think Putin says one thing and means another. He's very clear, he's very deliberate, he's very strategic. Whatever else one wants to argue about him, none of those criticisms would apply on those issues. And he means what he says. And so he doesn't trust the West at all. He doesn't believe anything they say. So looking at this conclusion that he's reached, incidentally, of course, along with the what appears to be effectively the entire Russian leadership, um, he he is proposing something that he is looking is aimed at simply cementing in place an objective that he has, which is really the objective was to remove the threat of NATO expansion from Russia. So since the Russians have taken these four areas in the east of Ukraine at quite tremendous cost, just as, of course, it's cost the Ukrainians to try to hold on to them. He, in my view of the situation, is he doesn't want to give them up because they did belong to Russia at one time. He has seen nothing. I want to underscore, he's seen nothing that indicates that the Ukrainian government or the West accepts or acknowledges that the treatment of Ukrainians of Russian descent was, simply, in effect, a racist policy by the government. This ultra-nationalist Bandera kind of thinking that, from the 1930s. And he it seems to me he would want, and in his position, I would also want to not only to protect those people, but to also protect Russia's access to the Black Sea, which is extraordinarily important for Russia's strategic situation. So rather than giving up this tremendously important industrial area, which has tremendous capacity that Russia can now use, and also subject the people to extraordinary violations of their human rights, and also leave Russia vulnerable to further malicious attempts to damage it, which the West has made clear its intentions have been to do that. He's basically saying, I'm taking this. It was Russia, and it was transferred to us transferred to Ukraine, really by an accident of bureaucratic decision-making made by Khrushchev. At that time, it was, of course, of no consequence because it was just a bureaucratic change in authority. But now it's much more than that because the people in this area have been severely abused. In fact, many of them killed. And there's, a secondary reason is there's tremendous industrial capacity there that Russia can use to further strengthen its already very strong economy. Plus, the Black Sea access is guaranteed with those places under Russian control. So it seems to me it's a no-brainer. I mean, it was clearly not his intention to do this because, as he has intelligently done, he's called this Istanbul Plus, because we know with the Istanbul simple Istanbul Agreement, he wasn't giving away all this territory, taking all this territory for himself. He was making sure that Ukraine had had the right to keep this territory as long, important caveat, as long as they treated people of Russian descent as equal citizens. That was a big part of this Istanbul agreement. People focus on the land questions, but that was not a minor issue. And it seems to me that his offer now is simply acknowledging that there has been no movement, no acknowledgement, no recognition of any kind that there is a problem with the way the Russian, the people of Russian descent in eastern Ukraine have been treated. And there's also a problem that if you do not even acknowledge that there was a human rights issue, and you don't even acknowledge that Russia has simply by military force taken the area away from you, you act like nothing has happened. Well, it seems to me his view would be, and I would agree with it, that he has no choice but to simply state the terms that he is, as Istanbul Plus, and also point out that he's not going to sit forever in this posture. And I am quite sure that he will, he's giving them a chance, but they don't seem to be capable of even understanding what's in front of them. And what he's going to do next is he's going to take the entire Black Sea coast, I think. I would in his position. And maybe he's very smart, so he may have ideas that are much more clever than my simple ideas. But that's what I would do in this position. And I would also take large parts of the Western Ukraine to isolate Kiev and possibly even take Kiev if need be. But I don't think he'll take Kiev because that could be a bloody fight, and it's simpler for him just to surround Kiev and squeeze it from all sides militarily, and let if the city has no food and water and military supplies coming into it, it will fall naturally. So he doesn't need to take Kiev by force, and he can save a lot of lives on all sides, Ukrainian as well as Russian, by simply surrounding it and forcing the Ukrainians to eventually surrender it, as they will have to do. So that seems to me to be what the next steps are likely to be, given the Ukrainian behavior. And I think a couple of months ago he said he had 500,000 troops in Ukraine, and he just recently said it's 700,000 now, so it's gone up. We know that he's building the army, and could be 1 million in a few more months. And who knows? And Ukrainians are basically, their army has been destroyed. They have lost so many people. In fact, I think I mentioned this on the last in the last interview. They're sacrificing their own people by sending soldiers who have almost no meaningful training out to be murdered in combat. And what are you going to do if you're a Russian commander or a soldier? You have these people. They're coming at you. Maybe they don't really want to fight, but they're out there. And your job is to protect your own people and to also advance the military situation for your country, because you have military objectives. So, my guess is a lot of these commanders are sick over what they're involved in. These are soldiers. They're not interested in murdering innocent people. But that's the situation right now. And I think it's going to be even a bigger catastrophe for Ukraine. And my guess is Ukraine will really cease to exist as any kind of independent state by the time this is over, because of the Western failure to accept and acknowledge the clear facts of what has happened, what has already happened, yet alone what's about to happen. So it's a sad situation.
Yeah. Just focusing on what has happened in Switzerland in the peace plan, in that peace summit. It was so amazing what has happened there. It shows how disconnected are these countries. I'm talking about the Europeans together with the United States. Just two of these highlights I'm going to mention here. The first was the president of Finland. He was complaining that Russia invaded his country during the Second World War. And the other thing that was so amazing, it was Duda, the president of Poland. He said that we want to decolonize Russia. We want to break down Russia in federations, because more than 200 ethnicities are living in Russia. It's unbelievable when you look at the reality on the battleground, when you look at what they're talking about in a peace summit, which is supposed to be about peace, not about war.
Well, it's in some ways, I don't know how you make it comical given the seriousness of it, but it is in some ways comical, because whatever problems Russia has with ethnic discrimination, and anyone who knows Russia knows that they struggle with that problem. Incidentally, so does the United States. And but whatever problems they have with ethnic discrimination, they've worked very hard to deal with it. In the case of Ukraine, they have disenfranchised a very large fraction of their people simply because they have some connection with Russian culture. It's 30%, 15% of the people were of direct Russian descent. Another 15% were Russian speaking. I don't quite understand, probably marriage and through family connections. And so they took 30% of their people and they disenfranchised them. And you hear people screaming that this is, it's a democracy. I mean, I think I said this earlier, but I feel like repeating it. I was so offended, and I mean offended as an American citizen, to see President Biden bringing Zelensky, this man who is responsible for all kinds of murderous activities, into this memorial of the D-Day invasion and calling him a great leader of a democracy. It's it's sickening to see an American president do that. At least for me, as an American citizen, I'm speaking now. It's just incredible. And this is what, unfortunately, the American government has descended into. Just outright lying. This outright lying has been going on for quite a while. It went on during the Obama administration as well. Now, you could say I'm not going after Mr. Trump and he's a liar, but I'm a Democrat. I mean, I vote for these guys. I give them money, and they lie to me, and they lie to, I find it offensive. I'm really deeply offended by it because I'm a Democrat. And if this is the choice I have, vote for a neo-Nazi like this guy Trump, or vote for a liar like Biden, I know what I'll do because I'm more worried about Trump than Biden. But that doesn't mean I'm making a vote. I'm voting for Biden. I'm just voting for the lesser of two evils. This is outrageous. It's really a terrible situation we have in the United States right now. So.
And just talking about these peace talks, we know the other side of these arguments. If we are not going to have peace, here comes the war, here comes the conflicts, here comes the escalation that can lead to a nuclear war. And we are here, you teaching us what would be the reaction, what would be the consequences of a nuclear war if something happens between the United States, between NATO and Russia. How do you explain for us, for our audience, that how we can imagine such a conflict between these two superpowers?
Well, unfortunately, I can imagine it, and it horrifies me because I just think of it as the end of the world. There are technical details where maybe humanity will survive. Maybe there are things that we don't fully know. But as far as I'm concerned, it's the end of the world. There's going to be so much destruction, so much death, so many people dying, not only immediately, but in the aftermath from radiation effects, effects on the atmosphere due to smoke injected from these gigantic fires that will be part of the nuclear exchange. God knows what will happen to the southern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere tends to be somewhat decoupled from the northern hemisphere because of the way the Coriolis affects the rotation of the Earth and the motions of the atmosphere in the north and south behave. But we don't know. We don't know how far this could go. This is not a minor issue. We just don't know. And to play with that, because you can't admit that you made a gigantic mistake and thought you could destroy a country that has hundreds of years of achievement as a unified state, that somehow you think, what do you think, if you poke the United States a bit, all of a sudden it's going to fall apart, and Montana is going to become an independent state, and New York is. I mean, this is crazy. I mean, it's fantasy on a scale that is. I could never imagine it if I didn't see it. And um, and of course, part of this has to do with the academic community, which I have said some not very nice things about, but accurate things uh, in earlier discussions, not only here but elsewhere. You have these people that are supposed to be experts on Eastern Europe and Russia and things like that, and they just allow political nonsense to be part of their rhetoric, rather than telling people, look, this is a country that has had many problems. It had, it only freed the slaves in the mid, you know, 19th century. It, serfs and it has been behind Western Europe in technology and in cultural, civil rights and things like that. But it's still a great country and it's made tremendous progress. And we can't just dismiss it. But rather than just saying that, they have all these ridiculous statements. And I find the most amazing and most ridiculous statements is to focus on Mr. Putin as the problem. What do they think? If Putin's going to disappear, all of a sudden Russia's going to become a great westernized democracy with a leadership that is totally delusional, like our Western leadership? Or, you know, what do they think? If Putin were to disappear instantly, we could get somebody who's a significantly more tougher and more dangerous, because I think Putin is very careful and he's very strategic in his thinking and he doesn't let his emotions get in the way. We could get someone different, and it's unpredictable. No one knows, not even if you're an insider in Russia. And they try to spin a totally ridiculous set of demonizing arguments about this man, when he has done really brilliantly, brought his country forward under extraordinary circumstances. And when he took over from Yeltsin, the economy was in a shambles, and he established a way to begin to collect taxes, and then he's modified the system so that it's more equitable. And the economy is now, third or fourth, well, probably fourth or fifth in the world, depending on how you measure it. The advances in its military have been incredible. I mean, they may well have the most advanced army in the world in terms of combat. There are weak points in their economy, but that's true of all economies. And this has been a gigantic accomplishment, not just militarily, but in terms of the economic foundation of Russia. Russia is now looking like China in many ways. It's looking like a capitalist country. There's a lot of private ownership, and the management of the government is mainly aimed at efficiently encouraging private development and also efficiently trying to limit the injustices of all capitalist systems. That's the nature of capitalism. It's like a runaway nuclear reactor. You have to moderate it, and which is what the Chinese have been doing. And it seems to me that Russia is going to really grow as an economic power, continue to grow, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens in 10 years to those parts of eastern Ukraine that are now going to be part of Russia, because the potential for industrial development there is fantastic. And so I think if you're looking at the situation as a futurist, you have to accept that Russia is going to be a far stronger power in a decade than they are now. And it would make sense to try to be friends with them and have a constructive relationship with them, just as it makes sense to try to be friends with the Chinese and try to have a constructive relationship with them. Taking a commercial competition and turning it into a military confrontation, like what the United States is now trying to do with China, is a disaster in the making. Because, as I said in our last discussion, if we get into a war with China over Taiwan, we will lose. It will look much worse than what has happened in Ukraine. We will lose significant parts of our Navy. And, I don't see how we come out ahead in that kind of situation. China doesn't come out ahead because the tremendous damage to Taiwan that would result from all this combat would hurt China. And the Chinese, unlike the Americans, the Chinese understand that. Chinese don't want to damage Taiwan's economy. It's a great benefit for them. Certainly the Taiwanese don't want their economy. I understand that the Taiwanese citizens, and I have friends from Taiwan, do not want to have the kind of restrictions on their political activity that would occur if the current Chinese rules for governing were imposed on Taiwan. But that's not a choice they have to face now. The Chinese are not going to invade unless the Americans push them into a situation where they feel they have no choice, pretty much like Putin felt. Right or wrong, we could argue about the pros and cons of what Putin has done with the special military operation. But there's no doubt in my mind that he felt he had no choice. May have been wrong, may have been right. That's another debate. But there's no question in my mind that the behavior of the West led him to the conclusion that he had no choice but to step into Ukraine. And in fact, I think he was really interested in scaring them into an Istanbul agreement, which they would have done if the West hadn't stopped it. So, it's like the West takes every positive potential development and turns it into garbage. It does damage. And that's exactly, they did this with the Istanbul Agreement, and now they're doing it with Istanbul Plus, because Istanbul Plus is going to wind up with Russia feeling no alternative but to take the entire Black Sea coast, take large parts of Western Ukraine, enough to make sure that it's crippled, and maybe turn Ukraine into a total rump state, which, I mean, they don't want to occupy a place that has all these cultural hatred for them, like is unfortunately the case in Western Ukraine. They don't need that problem. So what they'll do is they'll put in, they'll make sure there's a government that's less, that's more compliant, more cooperative, and they'll pretty much try very hard to leave Ukraine, what's left of Ukraine, alone, as long as it doesn't pose a threat to them. And everybody screams they have a right to defend themselves. Well, it also applies to Russia. So Russia's the only state that I'm aware of, maybe China too, that doesn't have a right to defend itself according to the leadership in the West. Everybody else has a right, including Israel, which has the right to murder all kinds of children and non-combatants and families because they're just defending themselves. That's the argument. Well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So anyway, the irrationality in this debate is hard to believe.
Yeah. In your opinion, when Lloyd Austin says that Putin has no right to put out any preconditions for any sort of peace talks, does he really understand the gravity of what he's doing right now?
Right, if you want to be cynical about it, Wright has nothing to do about it. He has done it. He's done it with military force because the people in the West have left him no choice. So I don't know what right he has or not. I mean, what do any of us have rights? But if your child is playing next to an electrical outlet and you ask the child to stop and the child doesn't do it, and you go and pick the child up and move him to away from the outlet, you are imposing your force on the child. I mean, you're not hitting them or abusing them, but what right? The child has a right to play with the outlet. You're doing what you need to do to protect your child and the future of your family. I mean, it's just I don't know what right Putin has to be in eastern Ukraine. He was forced to take these measures and to say, what do you mean you have no rights? I mean, he's there. you know, what makes these people think they have the right to pose a threat to Russia by injecting all these military systems and forces? That's what they were up to. They admit it. They say we saw this as an opportunity to damage Russia. Now, the fact that they're delusional, that they think that they could cause Russia to disintegrate and collapse and whatever I mean, where do they think they had the right to try to do that? I mean, they were stupid enough or delusional enough to think that they might be able to do it, but that's not Putin's problem. That's their problem because they started something they have no hope of completing. It's their little Ukraine project. Of course, in the process, they have destroyed a society and a culture because Ukraine will be multiple generations recovering from this, multiple generations, because so many young people have been killed and wounded, horribly wounded, and you should be taking care of them. I mean, I've been to our veterans administrations with people, and I'm 100% against the wars where these people were injured, because I think they were not justified. But let me tell you, there is no money as an American taxpayer I don't believe we should spend to take care of them because it wasn't their choice. And you're going to have the same situation in Ukraine, except the resources and the economic wealth of the place is going to be non-existent. The place is a wreck. And who's responsible for that? Well, Ukrainian leadership, for sure. All these little Bandera, Stepan Bandera admirers who are a closet white ultra nationalists, neo Nazis, which they are, and all these people in the West who did everything they could to put these neo Nazis in power. Why did we put them in power? Because we thought we could depend on them to hurt Russia. Just as we killed Salvador Allende in Chile so that, a dictator can kill people there because we wanted, as long as that dictator was going to give us, as long as Pinochet was going to give us what we wanted in the way of cooperation, it was fine with us how he murdered people. And, the same is true with the Shah in Iran and all kinds of other situations that we've done. We always go for these extremist elements because they have the guns, they are violent, they are well organized, And we can depend on them because as long as they do what we ask them to, and they know to do that, uh, we can depend on their cooperation, so to speak. And we don't really care about democracy. How do we care about democracy? How could you have a record like this and care about democracy? It's just nonsense. It's a lie. So, you know, I don't, I'm just beside myself with my own country at this point.
Yeah, talking about the conflict in Gaza, recently Netanyahu attacked Joe Biden for not helping him, for not sending more weapons. We know that Joe Biden did everything for him. He just getting a backlash in the American society because of his support for Israel and what Netanyahu is doing there. And in your opinion, why he tried to attack Joe Biden before going to the United States?
Well, well, I think first of all, I think he made a strategic mistake, but but that's another uh, discussion. What I think he was trying to do is he was trying to get a reaction and support from the ultra extremist Jews who play a role in a big role in influencing American politics. These are people who uh, APEC, the American Israeli whatever it is uh, organization. They have a lot of money. They can unseat um, people in Congress. The Congress is scared to death of them. Um, they have this little game they play of labeling people anti-Semitic who have legitimate criticisms of what's going on. I probably should mention this. I have before. I'm a Jew, so, and actually, I've been accused of being a self-hating Jew. Just in case, if you're not anti-Semitic, you could be a self-hating Jew. My wife is Catholic, incidentally. That is additional confirmation that I must be self-hating. So, you know, and unfortunately fortunately for the United States, and fortunately and unfortunately for uh, Mr. Netanyahu, there are a lot of Jews in the United States who are like me. You know, I would like to see Israel prosper and be in a safe environment. I have many friends there. I've been there several times. On the other hand, I don't want to see them murder and roll over all these Palestinians who have rights too. It's not an anti-Israeli position to say that these Palestinians have rights, and you've got to figure out some way to accommodate those rights. And they don't want to do it. And now they have a real problem. I mean, I've talked to my many friends in Israel, a lot of them involved in the military and military enterprise. The the Palestinian people, now this is of course a generalization, and generalizations are always violated. The Palestinian people hate the Jewish government and the Jewish people so much now because of the decades of repression that I honestly don't know that there is a solution at this point. I've said this in a cautious way to some of my Israeli friends, not because I'm hostile, but because I look at what has happened. You know, if you have two generations of your family killed and murdered and imprisoned by Israeli actions in the past, it's very hard to be forgiving. You you have to be a Nelson Mandela. I mean, I always marveled at Nelson Mandela because I always looked at him and I said, you know, if I were him, I'd want to murder all these people that did this to to the black people in South Africa. I just, I know it would be unjust. I know the feelings would be, because you can't blame every person just because they're white, that kind of thing, or Israeli or Palestinian. You can't do that. That's wrong. But the impulse would be there because we're animals, and anybody who tries to say we're not is fooling themselves. So when I look at a man like Nelson Mandela, he's inspiring to me because he was able to rise above this and see all these people, many of whom were innocent and many of whom were not, and treat them all as people he could negotiate with and build, a civil society from, it's the big problems they have to solve, but still trying to solve them. But, nothing happens overnight. They're big, but uh, it's very hard for me to see how the Palestinians and Israelis can accept each other at this point. And that, to me, is a very sad situation. And believe me, I would love to be wrong. And it is only a speculation. Had a conversation and I was asked if I would support Israel and the Palestinians and Israelis becoming a single state. And my reaction was, well, it's a great idea, but these people hate each other. You can't have a state with people who hate each other, in profound ways. And of course, we're having this struggle in the United States. I have a conversation. I tend to be immersed in a semi-academic environment because of, my past and my history. And, I'm carrying on a casual conversation and I start talking about how many people who voted for Trump I've talked to, and I've talked to a lot. And people look at me and say, "You talk to these people?" I say, "Of course I talk to these people. They're Americans." you know. And frankly, I don't. I've been candid with them in my discussions that I don't agree with them supporting Trump, but I am also candid in saying I understand their reaction to the U.S. government because many of these people, and I've talked to them, and I feel no hostility toward them. I've talked to them, and they've had their homes taken away from them. They've had all kinds of atrocities done at the hands of the U.S. government, which did not intervene on their behalf after this horrifying 2008 and 2009 economic collapse. We went in to save the big banks, which I agreed with because we can't let the economy collapse. But then we let these criminals who were in charge of these big banks roll over all these innocent people that they had fraudulently given mortgages. They had fraudulently convinced these people. It's no different from selling them the Brooklyn Bridge. The person does not have the knowledge to understand that this mortgage they should not try to obtain this mortgage because they do not have the economic resources. That's the responsibility of the bank. There are people who do silly things and lose money, but most of these people, I mean, I happen to have seen a lot of these up front. One of my very good friends has she has a winery not a winery. She owns a vineyard and she has all these wonderful workers. They're Latinos, and they are wonderful people, hardworking, dedicated, honest, but they are not sophisticated with regard to economics, to investing. And I've seen, and I look at I find out that these people have been misled into mortgages and they've lost enormous everything. And I say, who's responsible for that? It's not, they did not have the background. They go to a banker and the banker is supposed to be responsible. The banker is defrauding them. He's luring them into a situation that he knows they have no chance of surviving. So what he's going to do is steal what little money they have by repossessing getting them to pay something into this and then repossessing what he knew they could never afford. That's fraud. As I don't know if that isn't fraud, I don't know what is. And Obama administration did nothing about it. So they're surprised that there are a lot of people who are angry with the government. And if you're angry with the government and Trump is incredibly uncivil, insulting, mean-spirited kind of individual, but he's talking about the people who treated you this way. When he goes after these people, these are the people who let you be destroyed economically, who encouraged it, who didn't lift a finger. Well, I'm very sympathetic to a lot of these Trump voters. I feel a lot of sympathy and empathy for them. Like I said, I don't agree with them. I didn't shine them on. I've been honest with them in my views. I said, I understand what happened to you. I think it was wrong, but I don't think this is the right solution. But I certainly understand why these people, they're not, anti-democratic monsters who want to destroy the country and turn it into this uncivil place where everyone spits on everybody else. Not true at all. But if you don't treat them with any respect, people want to be treated with respect, and they have a right to be treated with respect. And, that's my motto: treat people with respect. And, I'll push back pretty hard if I think someone's being disrespectful to me, because I think I don't want to put up with it myself. But but my rule is you be respectful unless somebody does something to you where you need to defend yourself, or make yourself free from being harmed by someone of malicious intent. And I will defend myself in those situations. People who know me have seen me do it, and I'll do it again if I need to. But that has nothing to do with the general question of respecting people in general. To me, it's a given. Any person you meet on the street deserves respect. I don't care who they are, what job they do, how much they earn, what strata of society they're in. They're a human being, and they have value as a human being, and that's what matters most to me. It's that simple. But, these people say to me, "Why, you talk to these people? What do you mean? Of course I do." Anyway, sorry to get on my little tirade by
No, Ted, before wrapping up this session, in your opinion, how the Biden administration could have handled the situation in Israel? The other side of this question is this: why the Netanyahu administration is what they're trying to do, in your opinion, in Israel? We have been more than 6, 7 months in the conflict. He always is asking for more weapons from the United States, and he's telling us that he's gonna destroy Hamas. We know with each and every military expert that we talk, it says it's impossible to do that. But he's insisting on this issue that we wanna remove Hamas from Gaza. In your opinion, is that possible? Why he's trying to insist
First
on
of all, it's
this?
not possible. It's not possible to kill dozens of people, innocent people, and to execute a rescue, I'm glad some of these people were saved, but to kill dozens of people who are innocent and who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and then have the nerve to describe Hamas as responsible for it. You're the one who killed these people. It's incredible to me. And uh, and the United States, the president doesn't call him out on this. It's unacceptable. It's if we had a hostage situation in the United States where some criminals took some people in a grocery store, and we went in and killed everybody in the grocery store, we would not simply blame it on the criminals. what people would do, I know you've seen this in the past, people would blame the police for not executing the force in a controlled manner, to save the lives. Now, sometimes you do the best you can and people's lives are lost, but there's no indication of any kind that the Israeli government, they just go in shooting. They even shoot their own uh, hostages, and they blame it on Hamas. The fact that they are allowed to get away with this by American political leaders, not just the president, people in Congress, is is an example of moral corruption of the highest level of the American political system. It's no different from saying, well, we hung all those black people from trees, and well, some of them were guilty, some of them were not, but we got the right one, and I'm for it. Now, you couldn't do that in the United States because you have enough of the population, black, white, and otherwise, who would be outraged by it, and correctly so. But why is that different? We have this terrible history of racism and murder of blacks, and um, you could just excuse it. You could just say, well, it's okay. Hitler, he built the autobahns. It was a good, that was really good for Germany. So, um, you know, these are not excuses. These are outright examples of 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 moral failure at the lowest level you could imagine. I just could never imagine thinking such a thing, yet alone saying it in public, or it's just hard for me to believe. So it is a problem with the moral standards in American society. I think have dropped considerably, and it's part of it is this hyper partisan partisanship that we are seeing, but there is a moral collapse of the political leadership in the United States. You meet people on the street, they're quite civil, especially if you're civil to them. And uh, so, why is this happening? Well, it's happening because the country is in is declining as a great power. The political leadership does not know what to do about it, except to rattle sabers and provoke wars. In this case, with Russia, which is an American-provoked war. Provoke war with our biggest economic competitor, China, which, if they succeed, is going to have a terrible price in American lives as well as economic consequences for the United States, China, Taiwan, besides the tremendous loss of life. And all of it completely unjustified, unneeded. There's no basis for any of this. It's horrifying to see the fact of the matter is the American economic system, the capitalistic system we have, is not as efficient as the capitalistic system in China. It is a capitalistic system in China. The government is a big partner in a capital enterprise. You could argue about political issues, and that you could be justified. There are issues there, but if the government is a partner in a big enterprise, it has the right to represent the greater good of the country. That is to say, the people, the population, as a partner in the enterprise. So they may give very favorable loans to a company that's building, let's say, electric cars, as they did. And but they have people on the board of that corporation, and the corporation makes a profit, a good profit, but it's not allowed by the members on the board who are placed there as part of the loan and arrangement to take advantage by making outsized profits. So you don't have a situation where it cost $5 to manufacture a weight loss drug, and you're charging people $1,000 for it, like we have here now. We literally have something like that. Congress has done its own study. That's capitalism run completely out of control. That's where the nuclear reactor has gone supercritical. So there's nothing. Capitalism is a good idea because people who have their hands on the levers will ultimately be able to make much better decisions than a centralized command system. It's the way I think of capitalism, I don't think of it ideologically. It's a distributed decision-making system. You distribute the decision-making among the people who have the expert knowledge, also the interest, which is profit, their well-being, but at the same time, you moderate it with, neutron absorbing rods. You have the government plays a moderating role. Well, they can build a vehicle that's superior to a Tesla for $10,000, and it costs you $40,000 or $50,000 here. Well, it's not overproduction; it's efficient production. And you can criticize the freedom of speech in China, and I have friends in China, and I talk with them, and we are careful when we talk. We do not talk in certain ways. Privately, we say things, but and it's not a good situation. But they're not cowering in their homes. This is not Stalinist Russia. In Russia, it's abbreviated speech too. But let me tell you, I have had absolutely first-class research papers that I have done, because I do really good research. Maybe I'll sound a little arrogant now. And I've had the articles in press and then pulled from the journal because some idiots made a lot of noise to the journal editors, who then lied to me about the real reason for pulling it. And then, and in fact, in the particular case I'm referring to, I was on the editorial board of this journal for 30 years, and I resigned because I'm not going to be on the editorial board of a journal that acts this way. Princeton University. And they have this president, he's a Rhodes Scholar, he's a big shot. He won't even return my letters. He's too important. So that's not freedom of speech, is it? I mean, it's academic freedoms are supposed to be the most highly protected part of American society, of all society, supposedly. I just got an answer that they didn't want to see, even though it was fully supported by evidence, scientifically rigorous, but it didn't match the rhetoric of the time. And same thing happened at the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, this great journal, great liberal journal. They have no standards for scientific credibility. And if you read some of their articles, you'd see it. I think it's good that you have a journal like the Bulletin, because it's important for people to be talking about these issues. But don't assume that when you read an article from that journal that it's been refereed at all. It's correct or not. You should make sure you know who the author is, because the author is the one that determines whether or not it's a valid article. I can tell you the editor knows no science at all, none at all, and he pulled an article of mine. It was he actually told me that the problem with my article, this is great. The problem with my article is that I showed that a particular rocket could only go 2 kilometers. This was in the Damascus nerve agent attack that occurred in 2013. And incidentally, not only did I show this, but the chief of the UN team publicly agreed that they had done a similar calculation after we did ours and agreed with our result. He says to me, your paper depends on the rocket. Many of your conclusions depend on the rocket only being able to go 2 kilometers. In other words, it couldn't have come from the Syrian government controlled areas. So that's the problem. This is like telling Galileo, your paper depends on the sun being at the center of the solar system. How can I say it's correct? You know? And this is a guy who's supposed to be serious. This is the kind of environment as a scholar that I'm living in, you know, and then you know, so you know, I'm at Stanford and I inject a fact in a seminar, and you know, 500,000 Ukrainian soldiers are casualties, and the first response is, why are you attacking our speaker? And my response is, I'm not attacking your speaker. I'm actually talking to you. You know, incidentally, if they want to contest that, it's on audio. I have it because it was a public event and I was recording the audio right there on the audio. There's no question that this happened. And the director of the center, this guy Scott Sagan, I'll use names, he comes after me after the talk and he says, you know, we can't tolerate interruptions. You know, it's very rude. Well, Mr. Sagan, do you think injecting a fact that shows the whole seminar was nonsense is rude? What is rude about that? Don't you think it's scholarly? It's maintaining some level of scholarly integrity at your institution? No. He doesn't think he didn't recognize me before I said this. So, you know, incredibly rude, because his definition of rude is he has to recognize you. He has to control the discussion. You know, he'd be good. He's worse than I mean, I don't think Xi Jinping would do that to me in a conversation. Certainly not Putin. He'd listen to me and he'd come back with me with a counter argument or agree. So why are these guys so terrible and this guy, Scott Sagan, is such a great guy? I don't know. What I do know is I was in that center 40 years ago, and it was an intellectually alive place. And now it's nothing. It's ridiculous. It's pathetic. There's no debate of no discussion. It's unenlightened. It's just nonsense piled on nonsense. Pretty good accomplishment for the current leadership at Stanford. And of course, I hold, because I'm an academic and I've criticized my own leadership at MIT. Unfortunately, now we have a good president after 30 years. So I want to be clear that this new president we have, Sally Kornbluth, is doing very well, and I'm pleased to know she's there. But we had 30 years of basically criminal presidents who lied, who were involved in lying to the Congress of the United States. That's what we had. So you look at Stanford. So I look at Stanford, and I say, well, they have administrative leadership. How can they not know what's going on in this center? How can they not see this as a disservice to their students? So to me, it's academic malpractice. It's malpractice because you can be wrong. Let me be clear. Absolutely, you can be wrong. There can be opinions that are subject to debate that are not based purely on fact, and that should be encouraged. But for people to simply treat nonsense that's not close to the truth as if this is what the students have to accept as as real, it's amazing. I had this one other guy. I'm sorry to keep going like this one. This is one other guy. He's a former director of Los Alamos. They they hired him to be a co-director at this center. This guy knows nothing about nuclear policy. He builds bombs. He's retired now. He builds bombs. So I'm talking to him one day, and he tells me, "Well, I was really successful in teaching this class. This guy's been brought in, now that he's teaching." He says, when the class first started, half the students in it were uh, anti-nuclear power and half were pro-nuclear. At the end of the class, they were all pro-nuclear. So I said to him, "You think it's because they learned something from you, or you think it's because they learned what they had to say to you to get a good grade?" I mean, he hadn't even considered that possibility. This is Stanford University, you know, and so this is what passes for higher education. In this case, at Stanford in the science and technology policy area. Now, there are a lot of very fine scholars there. I would tell you that from my many friends on the faculty. But this kind of thing should not be tolerated by the administration. This has nothing to do with freedom of speech. This has to do with assuring that facts are provided to your students and debate is encouraged about those issues which are not cleanly, determinable by the facts, that where different values play a role and different logical principles play a role in reaching conclusions about what is good or what is not. But if you can't get the basic facts right, you have no basis for debate in these other things. And that's what goes on. That's what I see all over the place. So.